The year was 1721. Captain Jeanne de Clisson, known as the Lioness of Brittany, stood chained in the damp stone walls of a French fortress. Her crime? Challenging the very foundations of an empire built on male dominance. What happened to her, and countless other women who dared to sail under the black flag, reveals a darker truth about justice, gender, and power that history has tried to bury. Today, we're diving deep into the brutal reality of what happened to female pirates after capture. Fair warning, these stories are not for the faint of heart. They expose a system so threatened by women who defied traditional roles that it created punishments specifically designed to break not just their bodies, but their very spirits. Picture this. You're standing in a cramped colonial courtroom in Port Royal, Jamaica. The year is 1720. The air is thick with humidity, tobacco smoke, and the stench of unwashed bodies. At the defendant's table sits a woman, her hands shackled, her clothes torn from weeks in a rat-infested cell. But her eyes, they burn with defiance. This woman has committed what the British Empire considered not one crime, but two. First, piracy, the act of robbery on the high seas. Second, and perhaps more unforgivable in the eyes of 18th century society, she has abandoned her natural role as a submissive, homebound woman. The judges, all men, look down at her with a mixture of disgust and fascination. To them, she represents chaos incarnate, a woman who has rejected the very foundations upon which their ordered society rests. In their minds, such transgression demands not just punishment, but complete annihilation of everything she represents. In the legal documents of the time, female pirates were described using language that reveals the deep fear they inspired. They were called unnatural creatures, she-devils, and monsters in women's clothing. One British naval report from 1718 described captured female pirates as abominations against God's natural order, more dangerous than their male counterparts for their corruption of feminine virtue. This wasn't just legal prejudice, it was systematic dehumanization designed to justify the extreme punishments that would follow. The legal proceedings that determined the fate of female pirates were theatrical performances designed to reinforce social order rather than deliver justice. These trials, held in makeshift naval courts across the Caribbean and American colonies, followed a predictable script. Take the infamous trial of Bonny and Mary Read in Spanish Town, Jamaica. The courtroom was packed with spectators who had come not to witness justice, but to see two women who had dared to live as freely as men finally brought to heel. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of captured crew members who had been tortured into confession, and ship captains whose own involvement in illegal activities was conveniently overlooked. The defendants were not allowed legal representation. They could not call witnesses in their defense. They were not permitted to question their accusers. The entire process was designed to be a public spectacle of female submission to male authority. Judge Nicholas Laws, who presided over Bonny and Read's trial, made his intentions clear in his opening remarks. These creatures before us have forgotten their sex and nature. They have abandoned the protection of men to live as men, and in doing so, have forfeited all claim to the mercies traditionally shown to the weaker sex. The verdict was never in doubt, but the journey from accusation to execution revealed a system of punishment specifically crafted to terrorize any woman who might dare follow in their footsteps. While male pirates faced brutal punishments, female pirates endured additional layers of cruelty designed specifically to exploit their gender. These punishments were not just about deterrence. They were about sending a message about what happened to women who stepped outside societal boundaries. One of the most psychologically devastating tactics used against captured female pirates was forced public exposure. Before executions or floggings, women were often stripped of their clothing and paraded through colonial towns. This wasn't just practical, it was calculated humiliation designed to strip away not just their physical covering, but their dignity and humanity. Isabella de Carvalho, a Portuguese woman who led a mixed crew of pirates and escaped slaves off the coast of Brazil in 1693, was captured by Spanish colonial forces. Before her execution, she was forced to march naked through the streets of Cartagena while townspeople threw refuse and shouted obscenities. Contemporary accounts describe how she maintained her defiant posture even as she endured this degradation, which only seemed to enrage the crowds further. This practice served multiple purposes. It satisfied the voyeuristic desires of the crowds, reinforced the idea that these women had lost all claim to feminine modesty and protection, and created a spectacle so humiliating that other women would think twice before choosing similar paths. Pleading the belly was one of the few legal protections available to women in the 18th century. If a condemned woman claimed to be pregnant, execution would be delayed until after the birth. However, this mercy came with its own unique torments. Pregnant female pirates were subjected to invasive examinations by panels of local women appointed by the court. These examinations were conducted in public, with detailed descriptions often recorded for the court records. The women conducting these examinations were typically wives of local officials, chosen specifically for their social standing and moral righteousness. But even if pregnancy was confirmed, the reprieve was temporary. Catherine "Cat" Martinez, a Spanish-English woman who captained her own vessel in the Gulf of Mexico, successfully pleaded pregnancy to avoid immediate execution in 1704. However, she was kept in chains throughout her pregnancy, fed minimal rations, and forced to give birth in a cell with no medical assistance. After the birth, her infant was taken from her immediately, and she was executed 3 days later. The cruelest irony was that many women who used this defense weren't actually pregnant. They simply understood it was their only chance for even temporary survival. Court records show that approximately 40% of pregnancy pleas were found to be false, leading to additional charges of perjury and even more severe punishments. While flogging was a common punishment for all pirates, the public whipping of female pirates took on additional dimensions of spectacle and humiliation. These events drew crowds that included entire families, and the proceedings were designed to maximize both physical agony and social shame. The standard instrument was the cat-o'-nine-tails, a whip with 9 knotted cords that could tear flesh with each strike. However, for female pirates, additional modifications were sometimes made. Some colonial authorities ordered the use of whips with metal barbs, specifically to create more visible scarring that would mark these women for life as criminals and outcasts. Maria Santos, a Brazilian woman who led a crew of former slaves in attacks on Portuguese merchant vessels, was captured in 1687 and sentenced to 50 lashes. The punishment was carried out in the main square of Salvador, with an estimated 2,000 people in attendance. Contemporary accounts describe how she refused to cry out during the flogging, which so enraged the crowd that they began calling for additional lashes. But perhaps most disturbing was the practice of requiring female prisoners to remove their upper garments during these punishments. This was justified as necessary for the proper application of justice, but the true purpose was to add sexual humiliation to physical torture. The exposed bodies of these women became public property, subject to the jeers and lewd comments of spectators. Some colonial authorities took this degradation even further. In certain cases, female pirates were required to remain partially clothed in torn or soiled garments that exposed them while still maintaining a pretense of modesty. This created an even more potent symbol of fallen womanhood, neither properly covered nor completely exposed, but existing in a liminal state that emphasized their transgression of social norms. Not every captured female pirate was executed immediately. In the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, where the economics of slavery dominated colonial policy, many women found on pirate vessels, regardless of whether they were crew members or captives, were sold into bondage. This fate was particularly common for women of African, indigenous, or mixed ancestry. Colonial authorities operated under the assumption that such women were naturally suited for servitude, and their presence on pirate ships was treated as evidence of criminal behavior rather than possible coercion. The records from the slave markets of Portobello and Vera Cruz contain chilling entries that casually describe the sale of female pirates and their accomplices. These documents reveal a systematic process of dehumanization that reduced women who had once commanded ships and crews to mere commodities. Elena Vasquez, a woman of Taino and Spanish heritage who served as quartermaster on the notorious vessel Venganza del Mar, was captured during a Spanish naval operation in 1695. Rather than being tried for piracy, she was classified as rebellious property and sold to a plantation owner in Cuba. Her fate was recorded in a letter from the plantation overseer, who noted that she had to be kept in chains for over a year because she repeatedly attempted to organize escape attempts among the other enslaved workers. The sale of female pirates into slavery served multiple purposes for colonial authorities. It generated revenue for the crown, removed potential martyrs from public view, and reinforced racial and gender hierarchies by demonstrating that women, especially women of color, could be reduced to property regardless of their previous autonomy or authority. The floating hells, death by neglect. Some of the most horrific fates awaited female pirates on prison ships, floating dungeons anchored in harbors throughout the British Empire. These vessels, converted from decommissioned warships, were never intended for long-term human habitation. They became places where inconvenient prisoners could be forgotten while slowly dying from disease, starvation, and despair. The HMS Jersey, anchored in Brooklyn's Wallabout Bay, housed an estimated 11,500 prisoners during the American Revolutionary War. While most were captured soldiers, the ship also held pirates, smugglers, and other enemies of the crown, including an unknown number of women. Conditions on these ships defied human comprehension. Prisoners were crammed into holds designed to store cargo, with no sanitation facilities, minimal ventilation, and barely enough space to lie down. Disease spread rapidly through the confined spaces. Typhus, dysentery, and smallpox killed hundreds weekly on some vessels. For women prisoners, these conditions created additional nightmares. Sexual assault by guards and other prisoners was common, and pregnancy in such conditions was essentially a death sentence for both mother and child. The lack of privacy meant that even basic bodily functions became public acts, stripping away the last vestiges of human dignity. Joanna Harwick, an Englishwoman captured while serving as a gunner on a pirate sloop, spent 14 months aboard a prison ship anchored off Portsmouth. Her experience, recorded in a letter smuggled to her sister, provides a rare first-hand account of these conditions. We are packed like cargo in the lowest deck, where the rats are our constant companions and the stench of death never leaves our nostrils. The women among us fare worst, for we are sport to the guards, who view us as less than human. 3 women have died in childbirth since my arrival, their bodies thrown overboard without ceremony or prayer. I write this by the light of a candle stub, bought with my last coin, knowing that each day may be my last. Harwick died on the ship 6 weeks after writing that letter. Her body, like thousands of others, was dumped into the harbour without record or ceremony. Perhaps the most insidious punishment inflicted on female pirates was deliberate historical erasure. Colonial authorities understood that martyrs could inspire others, so they developed sophisticated methods of making inconvenient women simply vanish from the historical record. This erasure took many forms. Court records were deliberately incomplete or destroyed. Newspaper accounts focused on male pirates while barely mentioning their female associates. Official reports to London systematically minimized the roles of women in piracy, portraying them as passive victims or camp followers rather than active participants. The case of Captain Red Mary, who terrorized Spanish shipping in the Caribbean for over 3 years, illustrates this process. Contemporary Spanish reports describe her as more feared than Blackbeard himself, and credit her crew with capturing over 40 vessels. However, when she was finally captured in 1712, the official British records describe her simply as a woman of ill repute found aboard a pirate vessel. This systematic minimization served multiple purposes. It denied these women the recognition that might inspire others to follow their example. It reinforced the narrative that piracy was a fundamentally male endeavor, thereby maintaining gender hierarchies. Most importantly, it allowed authorities to punish these women without creating martyrs. The erasure extended beyond official records. Families were pressured to disown female relatives who had turned to piracy. Churches refused to perform burial rites for executed female pirates. Even their names were sometimes changed in records, replaced with generic descriptors like the Spanish woman or Black Betty's companion. The punishments inflicted on captured female pirates were designed to send messages far beyond the individuals involved. Colonial authorities understood that the spectacular destruction of one defiant woman could terrorize hundreds of others into submission. This strategy was particularly effective in port communities where women often worked alongside men in maritime trades. The public torture and execution of female pirates served as a warning to any woman who might be tempted to step outside prescribed gender roles. In New Providence, the execution of 3 female pirates in 1718 was followed by a dramatic decrease in women's participation in maritime activities. Previously, women had worked as tavern keepers serving pirate crews, as suppliers of goods to pirate vessels, and as informal intelligence networks. After the executions, many women withdrew from these activities entirely, fearing association with piracy. The psychological impact extended to pirate crews themselves. Many male pirates reported in confessions that the brutal treatment of their female associates had a profound effect on crew morale and cohesion. The knowledge that capture meant not just death, but public humiliation and torture specifically designed to exploit gender created an additional layer of fear that affected recruitment and operations. Despite the systematic attempts to erase their stories, fragments of these women's experiences have survived in letters, diary entries, and oral traditions. These glimpses reveal individuals of extraordinary courage and complexity who refused to accept the limitations society placed on them. Captain Margaretha de Vries, a Dutch woman who operated in the Indian Ocean, left behind a letter written to her daughter on the eve of her execution in 1703. "My dearest child, by the time you read this, I will be gone from this world. Do not mourn for me, for I have lived more fully in my 30 years than most women live in twice that time. I have seen sunrises over islands unknown to maps, commanded crews of brave souls, and answered to no master but my own conscience. If this be crime in their eyes, then I am guilty, but I am not sorry." Such voices remind us that behind every statistic of capture and execution was a human being who had made the extraordinary choice to reject the constraints of her time and place. Their punishments were designed not just to end their lives, but to serve as warnings that such choices would never be tolerated. The legal systems that prosecuted female pirates were carefully constructed to ensure that gender would always be a factor in determining guilt and punishment. Laws written by men, interpreted by men, and enforced by men created multiple layers of discrimination that made fair treatment virtually impossible. The British Piracy Act of 1698 made no explicit distinction between male and female defendants, stating simply that pirates shall suffer pains of death. However, the interpretation and application of this law revealed deep gender biases. Female defendants were routinely denied legal representation that was sometimes available to men. They were excluded from plea bargaining arrangements. Most significantly, they were subject to different standards of evidence and proof. In many cases, a woman's mere presence on a pirate vessel was treated as conclusive evidence of guilt, while men in similar circumstances could argue they had been pressed into service or coerced. This double standard reflected the legal system's assumption that women were naturally passive and therefore could only be involved in piracy through moral corruption or deliberate choice. Colonial courts also applied different standards when evaluating witness testimony. Statements from male crew members against female defendants were given full weight, while testimony from women, even when it contradicted the prosecution's case, was often dismissed as unreliable or vindictive. The treatment of captured female pirates was also shaped by economic considerations that revealed the intersection of gender, class, and colonial power structures. Different punishments carried different costs, and colonial authorities had to balance their desire for spectacular retribution against practical financial constraints. Execution was expensive. It required elaborate public ceremonies, transportation of prisoners, construction of gallows, and compensation for executioners. Public flogging was cheaper, but required crowd control and medical attention to ensure prisoners survived long enough to serve as examples. The sale of female prisoners into slavery, however, generated revenue. This economic incentive created a perverse system where a woman's fate might depend less on the severity of her crimes than on her potential market value. Younger women, particularly those of mixed race, who were considered more adaptable to domestic service, were more likely to be sold rather than executed. Account books from colonial administrations reveal the cold calculations behind these decisions. A 1707 ledger from Jamaica lists the disposal of captured pirates with clinical precision. Male pirates executed, 12. Cost to Crown, £47. Female pirates sold, 3. Revenue to Crown, £23. While British colonial authorities are most frequently associated with harsh treatment of female pirates, other European powers employed similarly brutal methods. Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Dutch colonial administrations all developed systems for dealing with captured female pirates that reflected their particular cultural anxieties about gender and power. Spanish authorities, influenced by Catholic teachings about feminine virtue, often subjected female pirates to forced religious conversion before punishment. This process could take months and included repeated confessions, public penance, and spiritual counseling designed to break down psychological resistance. French colonial courts in the Caribbean developed a unique system of graduated punishments based on a woman's perceived moral corruption. First-time offenders might be sentenced to convent imprisonment, while repeat offenders faced increasingly severe physical punishments culminating in execution. The Dutch, with their more commercial orientation, often opted for solutions that generated revenue. Dutch colonial records show a higher percentage of female pirates sold into indentured servitude or shipped to other colonies as forced laborers. Despite these variations in approach, the underlying patterns remained remarkably consistent across different colonial systems. Female pirates faced punishments specifically designed to exploit their gender, deny their agency, and reinforce social hierarchies. The systematic brutalization of female pirates had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate victims. The message sent by these punishments, that women who defied gender norms would face uniquely severe retribution, shaped women's choices and opportunities for generations. In maritime communities throughout the Atlantic world, the memory of what had happened to female pirates served as a powerful deterrent to women's involvement in any activities that might be construed as challenging male authority. This had profound effects on women's economic opportunities, social mobility, and personal autonomy. The psychological impact on surviving families was also severe. Children and siblings of executed female pirates often faced social ostracism and economic discrimination. Communities that had once tolerated or even celebrated unconventional women became significantly more conservative in their attitudes toward gender roles. Perhaps most tragically, the systematic erasure of these women's stories from historical records has perpetuated their punishment into the present day. By denying them recognition as complex historical actors, we continue the work that colonial authorities began centuries ago. The fate of female pirates reveals uncomfortable truths about the intersection of justice, gender, and power that remain relevant today. These women paid the ultimate price for claiming the freedom to live outside the boundaries society had set for them. Their stories remind us that the struggle for women's equality has always been met with fierce resistance, and that the methods used to suppress women's autonomy have often been specifically designed to exploit gender vulnerabilities. The public torture, sexual humiliation, and systematic erasure inflicted on female pirates were not simply products of their time. They were deliberate strategies for maintaining patriarchal control. As we grapple with ongoing issues of gender equality and justice, these historical examples serve as both warnings and inspiration. They show us what happens when societies feel threatened by women who refuse to accept assigned roles. But they also reveal the extraordinary courage of individuals who chose freedom over security, adventure over safety, and authenticity over conformity. The female pirates who died in colonial dungeons, on prison ships, and at the end of ropes may have been forgotten by official history, but their defiance echoes across centuries. In their willingness to risk everything for the chance to live on their own terms, they embodied a spirit of resistance that no amount of brutality could completely destroy. Their punishment may have been designed to serve as a warning, but their courage serves as an inspiration. in every woman who refuses to accept limitations, who challenges unjust systems, who demands equal treatment and recognition. The spirit of these forgotten pirates lives on. The question they pose to us across the centuries is simple but profound. What are you willing to risk for the chance to be free?